There are all three different approaches to the way scientists and engineers think about problems of the world. However, they took a different track, and we do need all types of flavors. We need the fundamental guy like Bohr, we need the translational person like Pasteur, and we certainly need more empirical people like the Edisonian approach. And I think the reason why we are seeing more and more people in the university that are more like Pasteur, picking the big problems and then going back and trying to fill in the science and the engineering to solve those problems, is because there's a kind of a gap, an innovation gap between industry and the university. Previously, the AT&T, Bell Labs, and Xerox PARCs, and GEs, and Philips filled that gap with innovation centers, and now they, in fact, have moved closer to product development, and so the universities are being relied on to develop and innovate and do new and innovative things and creative things to fill that gap. And so I got involved with this. I don't like to say I'm a Pasteur, but that's kind of the model I like to follow, where I like to pick big problems. And I sort of have worked on for many years this sort of problem selection paradigm where it takes a problem defined for you in some ways to figure out what you want to work on. And I found those problems as a physicist actually in the hospital. And I would go meet with doctors and figure out what their big problems were. And they started off with questions, if I only had this or if I only had that. And they didn't necessarily have the technology expertise to do it. And that's what I brought to the table, but they knew the problems. And so we started to develop a new interesting model where we wanted to do this a little bit more in accelerated fashion so that we'd pick the problem but then parallel process along the way. And so we take the problem defined by physicians, then we move forward, we get all the IRB approvals done ahead of time. We have the students and the faculty members sign up for an entrepreneurship class ahead of time, and we do all the other approvals that you need to work in the hospital with clinical and animal studies right before it started. And then we do all the same things that we would do as a scientist or engineering faculty in terms of publications and patents, et cetera, conferences. But then if it worked out well, we would move it right away because we parallel processed right into the clinic and to the bedside, and also if it was ready for investment, then we could go right to the investors with our business plan. And so I did a couple of companies that way, and we sort of moved this model. I published on this model, and started one with anemia, where the problem was that it was underdiagnosed in the US, and it's a huge third world problem, and it requires taking blood and all the bio aspects of taking blood and throwing that away. And so we developed a great device that was able to measure anemia through your eyelid, your conjunctiva, and those blood vessels there without touching any blood supply whatsoever or even touching any of that mucosal surface in any way, shape, or form. And I think what was interesting about that is we were able to do that in 2 years. And when we were done with that, the business plan was already done. We had the investors lined up. We were already in the clinic, and we moved it forward. And if we were to think about serial processing that, odds are we would have probably been 6 or 7 years down the road rather than 2 or 3. And so it's an interesting model, and I came here to Indiana a few years ago, and what was interesting was that we were certainly right away invited Notre Dame to be part of a clinical translational science institute right here in Indiana. And it's a great collaboration of Purdue and IU, Bloomington, IUPUI, the IU School of Medicine and Notre Dame, where we actually accelerate our discoveries to the bedside, and we find people that are creative to help us define problems, and we help find people that can be creative and solve the technology aspect of the problem, and we find creative investors who want to make big risk investments and stuff like that. So it's really quite a gem. And on the educational side of things, it's something I've always been passionate about, was entrepreneurship and these models of starting companies and translational research that I've been doing. Actually, I thought we should train students that way. I think in general in K through 12 education, and also in, quite frankly, in some of the undergraduate stuff that we do in STEM disciplines, we kind of beat the creativity out of people very early on, and it's sort of disheartening. And I look at my own pathway to my career, and it was in fact that way, and it wasn't until I met a very great PhD mentor who opened a lab and said, here you go, start off, it's an empty room, and go buy some equipment. And it was just that start where I had nothing, didn't know what to do, where I sort of felt that I could be a little bit more creative, and I learned how to be creative in that way, not because he taught me that, but because he cultivated it in me. And so at Notre Dame, we have a great new program. It's for scientists and engineers. It's called STEAM. We like the acronym, but it's a mouthful. It's Engineering, Science, Technology, Entrepreneurship Excellence Master's Program, and it's for scientists and engineers who actually want to be creative about value creation. And so we take their skills as scientists and engineers, and they're qualitative and they're creative, and we use that to study the business aspects of a very embryonic technology, because I think in the United States we're not going to be doing plastic circuits and software much longer. We're no longer doing things, cell phones, it's all being done overseas. But our imagination and our ideas and those early seed ideas in pharma, info, bio, nano are the things that we can develop as a country and be successful in terms of economic development. And that's what the program is about. It's about taking embryonic ideas, being creative with them, and then having a value creation plan as a scientist or engineer to actually train the next generation of innovators. And I do like this quote. This sort of resonates with this program that I started there with my colleagues in engineering and business. And I started a few other programs like this in the Netherlands and on the East Coast. But it's the quote, "The real voyage of discovery consists not of seeking new landscapes, but having new eyes." And new eyes can mean a lot of things. It could be taking existing technology and applying it to something else. It could be a discovery-based thing that you do in the laboratory, or it could be finding the right person to help you to find that problem which you may have a solution to. So that's all I'd like to say, and thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Your comment about stereotypes of science, of scientists. Whenever I'm teaching a group about creativity, I'll ask them, okay, picture a scientist in your mind. Who do they think of? Einstein. And which Einstein, though? The one who actually was doing path-breaking theoretical physics, or the one sticking his tongue out when he was wearing his bathrobe to a black tie event, right? And so then I show them a picture of what he actually looked like when he was doing the work. And they're all like, huh, I'm kind of a boring dude. Yeah. And then I show them a picture I found of him, and I'm not making any comments or judgments here. It is what it is. He liked to wear women's shoes when he went to the beach. And so I have a picture of him lounging on the beach in his heels. And I thought, I'm sure you didn't think of that, Einstein, did you? And but we get these stereotypes in our minds. I think it's just really fascinating. Lenore, as both a practicing scientist and someone who has worked with students at pretty much every single level of education, where do you think the pressure points are for us being able to help students think more innovatively and be more creative?
Well, again, thank you, everyone, for having me here. And great question. I think about this a lot, and I think the comment that you made that we beat creativity out of kids. Kids are scientists from the beginning. They're incredibly creative. They're incredibly imaginative. They're explorers and discoverers, and we do everything we can in the education system to take that out of them. And when I think back on this, I'm looking at all these paradigms for how we change education, and a lot of the metrics we have for what I'll deem our failure in science and in STEM education. And I think back, and boy, I was forced to memorize about everything there was. So, but why the heck am I a good scientist then? Well, at least I think I'm a good scientist. But in the end of the day, the people that are our leaders in science today were in fact trained in the system that now we're saying is horrible. And I don't dispute that it's a poor system, but I'll step outside of where I think the challenge is, and I think the difference is I grew up, my parents pretty much had no idea where I was when I got home from school. I was out flipping rocks, I was exploring, I was discovering, I was having my aha moments. And our early speaker this morning talked about aha moments being the exception rather than the norm, and I'll dispute that. I think if you walk into any university, any engineering program, any hospital, and you ask those people why they're scientists or engineers, they'll tell you about that aha moment, that discovery they had, that thing that made them so curious, that was so exciting and interesting to them. It was their development of observation skills and that yearning for more information that made them want to be scientists or engineers. And they kept that somehow through all the memorization and the maybe poor use of that skill set. So I say, why aren't we doing that anymore? And I think it comes down to the fact that our children today do not spend their time in unstructured settings. They don't explore and discover. They're not outside anymore. Instead, they're in much more structured. Every minute of their day is assigned to something. They're in sports, which I love sports, but everything about their day is structured, and that unstructured play where they develop problem-solving skills, where they develop this notion of creativity, is taken away from them. I refer to the students, they're a drop-down menu generation. They want yes-no answers. I mean, think about it. Everything they do, it's this or that. They select the next choice. They assemble information. They don't transform that information and create new knowledge and new value. And that, to me, is the challenge. So it's to some extent, the way our education system's changed. But to me, it's the underpinning of the other things we've done that we did personally, and the way we grew up and the way we explored information and developed that creativity and knowledge. That's the piece that's missing from underneath, so that the glaring problems in our education program are now so critical. I mean, I think to me that's it. So without that piece for kids to just explore and discover and be outside and that unstructured learning, without that, the education system is failing us. With it, we sort of did okay, I think, in the past.
Thank you. That's a very, 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 very interesting. I mean, essentially, you're arguing for. I mean, the system has worked pretty well for us in general, but again, as society has changed, it has exposed weaknesses that we just can't move forward with. It's very, very interesting. David, I want to jump to you here. What factors do you think? Essentially, what are Indiana's strengths that can be brought to bear at various levels of education to help push innovation and creativity more?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I might actually answer that by picking up on the comments that were just made. What we're really talking about there is this loss of serious fun, and there's a lot of interest now in the informal part of the education process. And so one of the things that Indiana really should be proud of is what's going on at Purdue. It's established the first school of engineering education that I'm very proud to head. And the idea of this is to say, if we're going to innovate in education, in this case engineering education, let's do it on the basis of evidence. Let's do it on the basis of research and knowledge. Let's draw on the learning sciences. Let's draw on the knowledge from the neurosciences and elsewhere and apply that in this place. And so we've established a lab that all of the 1,700 first-year students go to, called the Ideas to Innovation Lab, which is loosely based on a studio model. We're trying to develop habits of mind, a disposition towards, and we actually do use the design thinking. And I have a past that goes back to IDEO, which was mentioned in the Bay Area. I was there when it was actually started in '91 with Dave Kelly and others. So we're trying to bring some of that in. We're connecting, in fact, in some of our courses, the art and design. There's a long-standing program called the Interdisciplinary Engineering Program, where students can actually design their own. So I don't want to be mechanical, electrical, civil engineer. I want to design my own. And a number of those are doing really exciting things with the art and design department. There's one young woman who's creating her own textile design program within engineering. So there are really interesting things happening. And the conversation, I think we were talking about before, about the stereotypes of how you view things, and the National Academy of Engineering has introduced a report called Changing the Conversation, and it's how we talk about engineers and scientists. And in this case, one of them is to talk about them as creative problem solvers, not just problem solvers. And so it's about doing those things. It's about thinking. A report out of the UK, because there's been so many reports in the 2000s about the state of engineering education. The Henley report by the Royal Academy of Engineering UK, talking about engineers now, not just in the future, as specialists. Yes, we understand that meaning. As integrators, and that involves some of the creativity, innovation, but as change agents. That's not something we normally think about. So there are people doing that with engineering backgrounds now. It's a very cross-disciplinary nature. I spent some time in industry before coming here, and the practice of engineering, I've seen it globally. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm from somewhere else, in fact, Australia via Scotland, and I spent time, as I said, in the Bay Area and a few other places. And I can assure you the practice of engineering now in large organisations and the small ones is vastly different to 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. And so it's a rapidly changing place. Can I find you fairly traditional forms of education and engineering? Yes, I can.